What if everything you thought you knew about the return of Jesus was only part of the story? What if hidden within forgotten words and mysterious visions lay a revelation so powerful, so transformative, that it could completely change the way you understand faith, life, and even the future of humanity? Has this ever happened to you? The moment when a single truth shakes the foundations of everything you believed? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you more than anything you've ever heard before. For decades, people have been told to expect a dramatic spectacle: skies opening, trumpets sounding, a Messiah descending in glory. But what if that vision isn't the full picture? Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, revealed something no one had the courage to tell. In his trance-like readings, he spoke of a hidden truth about Jesus' return, a truth that most religious leaders ignored, suppressed, or dismissed as too dangerous. Why? Because it had the power to awaken not just faith, but the very soul of humanity. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Together we are building a global community of seekers, connected by the search for deeper meaning. Cayce's prophecy wasn't ordinary. It wasn't about fear, punishment, or waiting endlessly for a distant promise. Instead, it was about transformation, about awakening a new consciousness that is already within you. He revealed that Jesus' return was not confined to a physical event, but to something far greater: the rebirth of Christ consciousness inside every human heart. Imagine the impact of this idea. It means that the return isn't something we watch for in the sky. It's something we allow to happen within ourselves. What you're about to hear is more than a story. It's an invitation to see faith not as a waiting game, but as an inner revolution. Cayce challenged centuries of traditional expectation by declaring that the Messiah was not far away. He was already here, living within each of us, waiting to be recognized. This truth was considered dangerous because it stripped away the power of institutions and gave it back to the individual. The return, Cayce suggested, would not be marked by spectacle, but by transformation, by the awakening of love and compassion in human hearts. Think about that. For a moment, how many times have we searched outside ourselves for signs and wonders, while ignoring the divine presence already alive within us? How often have we been distracted by promises of future glory, when the true power of Jesus' return might already be unfolding in our daily lives? Cayce's vision forces us to reconsider everything. It compels us to ask whether we have been waiting for a show, while the real miracle has been quietly calling from within. This revelation has the potential to transform not only our spiritual lives, but also the way we see the world. If Christ's return is about a collective awakening of consciousness, then every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, every spark of love is already part of that prophecy coming true. Stay with me until the end, because the details of how Cayce described this process will challenge your assumptions in ways you never expected. The question now is not, when will Jesus return? But are we ready to welcome him within ourselves? This shift changes everything. It takes the focus away from waiting for an external savior and places it on the choices we make every day. Do we live in love or in fear? Do we open our hearts to compassion or close them with judgment? These are not small questions. They are the very keys to unlocking the mystery that Cayce insisted was hidden in plain sight. And this is only the beginning. As we move forward, we'll uncover not only the hidden clues Cayce left behind, but also the signs he said would accompany this awakening. A spiritual roadmap that speaks as much to our time today as it did when he first revealed it. Stay close, because the next step in this journey may forever change the way you see the return of Christ. If you're drawn to insights like this and want to keep exploring these hidden truths with me, make sure to subscribe. That way, you'll always be here when the next revelation unfolds. For a long time, Cayce's words about Jesus' return were left in the shadows, almost as if they were too uncomfortable to be acknowledged. Imagine that. A prophecy so profound it risked shaking the very foundations of established belief systems, quietly tucked away, hidden in archives, whispered about, but rarely brought to the surface. It raises the question, Why would something with such potential to inspire transformation and spiritual awakening be suppressed? Was it fear of losing control, or fear of confronting a truth that demanded real change? Behind the scenes of history, silence often speaks louder than words, and in this case, the silence around Cayce's prophecy may be the greatest evidence of its disruptive power. Cayce himself did not speak as a preacher seeking followers, or as a scholar chasing recognition. He was known as the sleeping prophet, someone whose visions emerged not from conscious thought, but from the depths of trance states. In those altered states of awareness, where ordinary logic seemed to dissolve, he accessed insights that stretched beyond human reasoning. It was as if he tapped into a universal field of knowledge, a place where hidden truths about life, destiny, and the return of Christ were waiting to be revealed. His descriptions weren't vague riddles meant to confuse. They were precise enough to challenge the comfort zones of those who heard them. When Cayce spoke of Jesus' return, he didn't reinforce the dramatic images most people carried in their minds: the clouds parting, the heavens shaking, the sudden arrival of a figure robed in glory. Instead, he presented something radically different. He described a return that would not fit the expectations of grandeur, but would manifest in ways both intimate and transformative. The return, he suggested, was not an external spectacle, but a shift in consciousness, a rebirth of Christ within the human heart. This idea was not only revolutionary, it was dangerous to the systems that thrived on the anticipation of a distant savior, rather than the responsibility of personal awakening. Think about the impact of such a statement. It redefines the journey of faith from passive waiting to active transformation. It suggests that the divine presence does not arrive from outside, but is ignited within. This is more than a theological shift. It's a mindset shift. It places the power back into the hands of individuals, urging each person to confront the hidden truth that maybe, just maybe, the return has already begun. What Cayce offered wasn't a promise of a date circled on a calendar, but a call to awaken, here and now, to the Christ consciousness that pulses quietly in every act of love, compassion, and selflessness. The resistance to his vision becomes clearer when we understand its implications. Religious institutions rely heavily on external narratives, on rituals and structures that centralize authority. But Cayce's prophecy pushed against that current, saying that the true stage of the return was not in cathedrals or ceremonies, but in the human heart. The sacred space was not built of stone but of choices, decisions to forgive, to love, to transcend fear. This shift threatens control, because once people realize the Messiah is not only coming to them but rising within them, the old structures of dependence begin to crumble. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the essence of Cayce's trance visions lies not just in what he said, but in what those revelations demand of us. They demand the courage to see differently, to face the possibility that centuries of expectation may have been built on misunderstandings. They ask us to examine the behind-the-scenes truth of our own lives. Do we wait passively for transformation, or do we allow it to unfold in the way we live, breathe, and act each day? The mystery of Christ's return, according to Cayce, was never about spectacle. It was about a quiet revolution of spirit, a consciousness that does not come crashing down from the skies, but rises gently, within. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this: if his words are true, then the responsibility is not out there. It's here, within us. The return is not a question of if, but of when we are willing to awaken. The question isn't whether the prophecy will unfold, but whether we will recognize it when it does. Write in the comments, "I'm also on this path," if this resonates with you. Cayce's words strike with such intensity because they remove the veil of distance we've been conditioned to believe in. He wasn't talking about a Christ hidden in the clouds or waiting for some grand theatrical moment to descend upon the earth. He was pointing to something much closer, something almost disarmingly simple. Christ is already present. The signs of return, he said, weren't locked away in a future prophecy, but were unfolding before our very eyes. That hidden truth forces us into a new mindset, one that doesn't wait for a spectacle, but looks at the impact of love, compassion, and awareness happening right now in the world. When you stop to reflect, it's almost unsettling. How many of us live with the expectation that divine change will come from outside, from beyond, when in reality Cayce suggests that the transformation begins within us? This is not just a spiritual perspective, it's a complete reconfiguration of our decisions, our priorities, our way of living. Instead of asking when Christ will come, the deeper question becomes, are we awake enough to recognize Him here? That shift in perspective is where the true journey starts, because it pulls the spotlight away from external authority and turns it directly onto the human heart. But awakening to this reality is not easy. Cayce understood that humanity often clings to comforting illusions, preferring to wait for salvation rather than face the uncomfortable responsibility of embodying it. He wanted to push humanity to confront the words and visions that had long been read only at the surface level. Beneath the scriptures and behind the scenes of tradition, he insisted there were codes, revelations, layers of meaning that called us not to wait, but to act. And isn't that often the hardest part? The courage to step out of passivity and into responsibility, to accept that maybe everything we were told about the return was only a fragment of the bigger picture. Accepting his prophecy demands courage because it means dismantling long-held beliefs. Imagine the impact on someone who has spent their life waiting for a trumpet blast in the sky, only to be told that the true return is happening quietly in the transformation of consciousness. To embrace this means rethinking the very structure of faith, power, and control. It means realizing that the sacred is not only in a distant heaven, but in the decisions you make today, in the compassion you choose to show, in the forgiveness you extend even when it hurts. This is not a comfortable truth, it's a disruptive one, and perhaps that is why so many chose to bury Cayce's words rather than amplify them. The beauty of his vision lies in its raw simplicity. There is no cosmic stage or distant countdown clock, but an inner revolution happening now. It calls us to see that Christ's presence beats in every gesture of love, in every selfless act, in every moment we rise above ego and choose to serve. This is the essence of what Cayce pointed to, a return not marked by thunder in the skies, but by quiet transformations in human hearts across the globe. The question is whether we are willing to recognize it, whether we can summon the courage to accept that prophecy, not as a future promise, but as a present reality. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when Cayce spoke of courage, he wasn't simply talking about bravery in the face of opposition. He was pointing to a courage that demands transformation, a mindset capable of letting go of outdated expectations and embracing the unknown. To believe his words is to stand at the edge of comfort and step into the vastness of a truth that changes everything. It is to accept that the Messiah is not an external figure waiting to appear, but a living presence already resonating in each of us, waiting to be awakened. If this idea resonates with you, write in the comments, "Awakening begins within me." For most of us, the idea of Jesus' return has always been painted with vivid, almost cinematic imagery. Skies breaking open, light pouring through the heavens, angels, sounding trumpets that echo across the earth. It's the picture that has lived in religious art, in stories told from pulpits, and in the collective imagination of generations. Yet Cayce stripped that imagery away with unsettling clarity. He said there would be no grand stage, no divine theater to witness from a distance. The return, according to him, was not about spectacle. It was about something far more subtle, far more intimate, and that's where the true shock lies. When you remove the promise of a cosmic display, what you're left with is a truth that demands responsibility. Cayce insisted that the return of Christ was not an external interruption to history, but the awakening of a new consciousness within humanity. Instead of waiting for heaven to break through the clouds, he urged us to notice the quiet revolutions already happening inside us. Think about the impact of this shift. The Messiah is not approaching from outside, but rising within, in the form of compassion, forgiveness, and love that transcend our ordinary patterns. It changes the entire mindset of faith. Suddenly, it's no longer about passive expectation, but about daily decisions that shape whether or not Christ becomes real in our lives. This is where Cayce's vision challenges us the most. He described the return as consciousness itself, something that spreads like light, quietly and invisibly, through the choices of people who begin to live differently. The signs of this return are not thunderous sounds or burning skies, but transformations of the heart, the moment when anger gives way to kindness, when selfishness is replaced by generosity, when fear dissolves into trust. In those moments, Cayce said, Christ is reborn. And if that is true, then the return is not a single day marked on a calendar. It is happening in countless moments, behind the scenes of ordinary life, every time someone chooses love over hate. The beauty and the challenge of this idea is that it leaves no one as a mere spectator. There is no audience here. There is only participation. The stage is the human heart, and each of us carries the responsibility to allow Christ's presence to awaken within. That makes the prophecy personal. It is not about waiting for an external savior, but about becoming the vessel through which that savior manifests. And that is why Cayce's message was so often rejected. It does not allow us to sit passively, hoping for rescue. It demands transformation, a radical rethinking of how we see ourselves and our purpose in this world. The inner awakening he described is both liberating and unsettling. Liberating because it assures us that Christ is already here, that the return is not far away. Unsettling because it means the weight of recognition falls on us. If Christ consciousness is already moving among us, then the question becomes, are we awake enough to perceive it? Are we courageous enough to embody it? This is not a distant promise. It is a present reality calling us to live differently. And when you let that thought sink in, you begin to see how Cayce's words carry the hidden truth of transformation. They take what seemed like a far-off event and bring it close, into our breath, our choices, our everyday journey. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when Cayce spoke of this inner rebirth, he was pointing to a profound shift in perspective. He was showing us that the divine does not arrive with thunder, but with quiet impact. It is not the spectacle of the heavens, but the miracle of the human heart opening. It is a revelation that changes everything, not in the distance of tomorrow, but in the intimacy of now. If this resonates with you, write in the comments. The awakening has already begun. When Cayce shared this vision, it wasn't only individuals who felt challenged, it was entire institutions. His words cut straight through the structures that had been built over centuries, systems designed to centralize faith in rituals, rules, and authority figures. For those who relied on power rooted in external control, the idea that Christ could be experienced directly within each human heart was deeply unsettling. If the sacred no longer needed to be mediated by dogma or hierarchy, then where did that leave those who claimed to be gatekeepers of salvation? This resistance wasn't just theological. It was about influence, authority, and the fear of losing control over the collective mindset. And that explains why his revelations were often labeled as dangerous or quietly buried, hidden behind layers of tradition that preferred safety over transformation. But despite opposition, Cayce's message carried a disarming simplicity. Christ manifests every time love is awakened. It wasn't a metaphor for him. It was the living proof of the prophecy. Each act of compassion, each choice to forgive, every small decision to care for another became, in his eyes, a moment of return. It meant the sacred wasn't waiting to arrive at some distant hour. It was here, breathing through ordinary lives, woven into the invisible fabric of human connection. This perspective shifts the weight of expectation. The return is not a far-off event. It is a reality unfolding through us, if only we are willing to see it. And yet, Cayce warned that most people remain blind to this truth. Distracted by the spectacle they expect, they search the skies for signs while overlooking the evidence beating in their own hearts. It is easier, after all, to hope for a miracle from outside than to confront the hidden truth that transformation begins within. Waiting for a Messiah to arrive with thunder allows us to delay responsibility, but recognizing Christ already alive in us demands courage. It forces us to take ownership of our journey, to realize that the real stage of revelation is not the heavens above, but the life we live each day. This is where the tension lies, between the longing for a grand event and the quiet reality of inner awakening. The world looks for drama, but Cayce pointed to subtlety. He showed that the divine doesn't need trumpets to announce itself. It reveals itself in the stillness of love, in the impact of kindness, in the transformation that takes place when ego gives way to compassion. Behind the scenes of human history, this process has always been unfolding, whether we recognize it or not. The problem isn't absence, it's awareness. The Christ we are waiting for may already be here, moving invisibly through the hearts of those who choose love over fear. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the resistance to this vision doesn't just come from institutions, it often comes from within ourselves. The hardest battle is not always external, it is internal. We crave the certainty of spectacle, the comfort of being told what to believe, rather than daring to step into the responsibility of awakening. That's why Cayce's prophecy feels so provocative. It takes the safety net away. It insists that the return of Christ is not something we passively observe, but something we actively embody. The courage required is not just in facing others, but in facing ourselves. And in that confrontation, the possibility of transformation becomes real. If these words resonate with you, write in the comments, "Love is the true sign." Cayce often emphasized that the signs of Christ's return would not be hidden in secret codes known only to a few, but visible to all who dared to see. He pointed to global upheavals, moments when the very foundations of human life seemed shaken, wars spreading across continents, natural disasters rising in frequency and intensity, crises that leave entire populations searching for meaning. These, he said, were not coincidences. They were signs. Signals written not in the heavens alone, but etched into the unfolding story of our shared human journey. To many, they appeared as chaos, but Cayce framed them as markers of a deeper transformation taking place behind the scenes. Think about what it means to view conflict, disaster, and unrest not only as tragedy, but also as invitations. It changes the lens completely. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to us?" we begin to ask, "What is this trying to awaken within us?" Cayce's perspective reveals the hidden truth that these events are not simply about destruction, but about the breaking down of old systems that no longer serve us. The shaking of the world. Outside mirrors the shaking needed inside. The collapse of violence, greed, and ego, to make room for compassion, love, and cooperation. This is where the prophecy takes on an unexpected depth. For Cayce, Christ's return could not truly manifest until humanity grew weary of repeating cycles of violence. It wasn't enough for individuals to awaken alone. There had to be a collective shift, a mindset change so profound that the world itself would feel it. Wars, hunger, and the endless pursuit of power had to reach a breaking point, because only in exhaustion from chaos would people finally choose cooperation over conflict. This was not about punishment. It was about readiness. The Earth's turmoil became a mirror, showing us the cost of refusing to awaken. And when you begin to look at today's world through that lens, the impact is undeniable. Our time is filled with questions about meaning and direction. People are questioning structures of authority, searching for new ways of living, exploring spirituality not as dogma, but as lived experience. It's as though the signs Cayce described are no longer distant possibilities, but living realities, unfolding on the stage of history. His prophecy pushes us to recognize that the return is not hidden in tomorrow. It is happening now. In every moment, humanity chooses whether to persist in division or step into cooperation. The transformation of hearts he described wasn't a poetic metaphor. It was a call to action, a revelation that the return could only take root in soil prepared by love. Every time a person decides to forgive, every time a community comes together in compassion, every time fear is replaced with trust, a seed of that return is planted. The awakening isn't just mystical, it's practical, embedded in daily decisions that either reinforce separation or invite unity. That is why the crises we witness are not just tragedies, but thresholds, forcing us to choose what kind of future we want to create. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Cayce wasn't only pointing to the external signs around us, he was pointing to the internal revolution required to truly receive them. He was saying that without the inner shift, the outer signs mean nothing. They become noise, chaos, endless headlines that leave us overwhelmed. But with awareness, those same signs transform into revelations. They tell us that humanity stands at a crossroads, and that the return of Christ consciousness depends not on when the skies open, but on when our hearts decide to. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I choose transformation." Cayce believed that one of the clearest signs of this unfolding prophecy would be the shift in values taking place within humanity. He wasn't just pointing to political changes or social reforms, but to something much deeper, a collective questioning of the very systems that shaped our lives. For centuries, people accepted structures of power as immovable, but today we see more and more individuals daring to ask different questions. Why do we live the way we do? Why are wealth, status, and control held above compassion, cooperation, and truth? Behind the scenes of society, this growing restlessness signals the beginning of a new spiritual awareness. People are no longer content to follow blindly. They want to understand, to connect, to find meaning that transcends material success. This is the hidden truth Cayce foresaw, an awakening that challenges not only institutions, but also the mindset we have carried for generations. When he described wars, disasters, and unrest, he wasn't dismissing the suffering they caused. He acknowledged their pain, but insisted they carried within them a hidden invitation. What seems like collapse on the surface often hides the seeds of transformation. Every crisis shakes us out of comfort, forcing us to make new decisions, to reconsider what really matters. And isn't that true in our own personal journeys as well? Often it is through loss, struggle, or breakdown that the greatest growth emerges. Cayce's message was that humanity itself is undergoing such a process on a global scale. What looks like tragedy can, in truth, be the labor pains of a new consciousness. The invitation is there, but it is up to us whether we accept it or ignore it. This is why he said the return of Christ was not about waiting for the skies to part, but about learning to recognize the divine presence already here. For Cayce, Christ resided within the heart of every person, not as a distant figure, but as a living reality waiting to be acknowledged. This revelation removes the distance we've been conditioned to expect. It means that the sacred is not locked in temples, nor dependent on grand events, but alive in the choices we make every day. Imagine the impact of truly living with this awareness, that each conversation, each act of kindness, each moment of forgiveness becomes a doorway through which Christ consciousness enters the world. The beauty of this vision is that it restores responsibility to the individual, while also binding us together in a collective journey. If Christ lives in me and in you, then how I treat you is no longer just about morality. It is about recognizing the divine in another. Every decision carries weight, because each one is either an opening for that consciousness or a barrier against it. And perhaps this is why Cayce's words were considered so disruptive. They call us not to look outward for salvation, but inward, where the real transformation must begin. They challenge us to admit that waiting for a Savior is easier than becoming the vessel of that Savior ourselves. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the idea of the Christ within changes not only how we see spirituality, but also how we approach life itself. It affects our mindset, the way we make decisions, the way we respond to challenges. It redefines success, shifting it away from external achievement toward inner awakening. It asks us to look at every trial, every conflict, and every act of compassion as part of a greater revelation unfolding. This is not abstract philosophy. It is a living invitation to experience the return of Christ here and now, not as a distant hope, but as a present transformation. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "The Christ lives within me." Cayce explained that the proof of Christ's return was not something to be witnessed in the sky, but in the everyday gestures that often go unnoticed. Every act of love, every sacrifice for the sake of another, every moment when ego is set aside to bring kindness into the world, these were not small things. They were, in his words, signs that Christ consciousness was already moving through humanity. To live with compassion was not simply to be moral or good-hearted, it was to participate in the very unfolding of the prophecy. What religion painted as a distant event, Cayce revealed as something quietly happening here and now, carried in the flow of compassion from one heart to another. But that realization comes with a weight. The responsibility is no longer shifted to some external force that will arrive and rescue humanity. The prophecy, according to Cayce, placed the responsibility squarely on us. It asks us to awaken, instead of waiting passively. It requires us to embody the transformation rather than watch from the sidelines. This change in mindset is unsettling because it removes the safety of postponement. It leaves no room for hiding behind excuses or waiting for a grand spectacle. Instead, it calls us to make decisions today that align with the presence of Christ already within us. And that is both liberating and demanding, because it redefines faith as action rather than expectation. What makes this vision so striking is that Cayce never described Jesus as coming back simply to judge or condemn. He spoke of a return that would awaken, that would inspire, that would ignite the divine spark already placed within every soul. That spark, he said, is not something earned or given by an institution. It has always been there, waiting for recognition. The journey, then, is not about finding something outside, but rediscovering what was hidden inside all along. And this journey isn't abstract. It reveals itself in the way we treat one another, in the courage to forgive, in the resilience to love in a world that often pushes us toward fear and division. Think about the impact of that. If Christ's return is tied to our willingness to awaken the divine spark, then the timeline of prophecy is not dictated by the heavens, but by human hearts. It suggests that the moment of return is not fixed. It unfolds in rhythm with our choices, with our capacity to recognize the sacred within ourselves and others. This is a hidden truth often overlooked, that divine presence is not waiting for the right era, but for the right awareness. And it means the journey is collective but also profoundly personal, because each soul carries its own responsibility in this unfolding revelation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the idea of awakening the divine spark changes the way we think about spirituality itself. It is no longer about doctrines or distant promises, but about transformation in the here and now. It reshapes the way we approach challenges, seeing them not as punishments, but as opportunities to reveal more of that inner light. It reframes suffering as a call to compassion, and success not as power over others, but as harmony with the Christ consciousness within. Behind the scenes of daily life, this spark is what guides us toward choices that align with love rather than fear. And it is in those choices that the prophecy takes form, not in visions of distant thunder, but in the quiet power of a heart awakened. If this vision speaks to you, write in the comments, "The spark is alive in me." Cayce's vision carries with it a liberating force that unsettles as much as it comforts. For centuries, people have lived under the weight of dogma, told that access to the divine required intermediaries, rituals, and authority. Yet in Cayce's words, that entire framework begins to dissolve. His revelation was simple but radical. Christ is already here. The return is not something we have to wait for, nor something locked in distant prophecy. It is a living presence woven into the fabric of every soul willing to recognize it. This truth frees humanity from dependency and places responsibility directly in our hands. It means the power to experience the divine no longer rests outside of us, but within. And that realization, while liberating, also carries a challenge. If Christ is already present, then the barrier has never been the absence of God but our own blindness to what is already here. For Cayce, the place where this presence dwells was not a temple made of stone or a church raised on earth, but the human heart itself. This was perhaps his most provocative idea, because it shattered centuries of conditioning that tied holiness to external spaces and rituals. He said the true temple is the heart, an inner sanctuary where the divine longs to dwell. That perspective transforms the way we see ourselves and others. If the heart is the temple, then every interaction becomes sacred ground. Every conversation, every decision, every act of kindness or cruelty becomes an offering, a reflection of how we honor that indwelling presence. The journey of faith, then, is not about traveling to distant holy sites, but about learning to enter the sacred space within, where Christ consciousness waits to be acknowledged. This shift in mindset also reshapes the way we think about time. While most believers imagine prophecy as a fixed timeline pointing to an appointed day, Cayce spoke of something different, a hidden calendar not measured by clocks or dates, but by the unfolding of spiritual milestones. Among his readings, some pointed to 2030 as a symbolic marker, a threshold rather than a deadline. He did not describe it as a moment when the sky would break open, but as the culmination of a cycle in humanity's growth, a period when people would be more prepared to recognize the Christ within. To those who expected exact dates, this felt vague, but Cayce insisted the language was symbolic. God's time, he said, does not follow human clocks. When we view 2030 through this lens, it ceases to be about predicting an event and instead becomes about recognizing a process. It is not the arrival of something new, but the awakening to what has always been here. The hidden truth is that this calendar measures consciousness, not chronology. It reflects the readiness of humanity to shift values, to let go of violence, to embrace cooperation and compassion. This means the prophecy is not something that happens to us. It is something we either delay through fear and division, or accelerate through love and awareness. And that realization changes everything, because it places the weight of transformation on our daily choices. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when Cayce spoke of milestones like 2030, he was not inviting fear or obsession with numbers. He was inviting vigilance, a readiness to live as though the return is always now. The date was less a warning of an end and more a reminder of responsibility, a call to shift our mindset, to align with love and to prepare the temple of the heart. In that sense, the prophecy becomes less about waiting for a miracle and more about becoming the miracle ourselves. It is an invitation to step into a journey where time itself bends to the readiness of the soul. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "My heart is the temple." Cayce was clear that to interpret prophecy literally is to miss its essence. He warned that trying to reduce divine timing to numbers on a calendar was like mistaking the shadow for the substance. Dates, he said, were never the true focus. They were symbols, milestones pointing not to an external event, but to inner states of consciousness. This perspective demands a different mindset, one that looks beneath the surface of time and asks what those markers mean in terms of human growth. When Cayce mentioned periods like 2030, his intent wasn't to predict a day circled in red ink, but to highlight a threshold, a stage in the collective journey, where humanity might be ready to recognize the Christ already here. The danger of literalism lies in waiting for spectacle, instead of living the transformation in the present. This is why he spoke of continuous transformation. For Cayce, the return of Christ was not a single dramatic appearance, but an unfolding process, layer by layer, heart by heart, decision by decision. It was about awakening, not arrival. The hidden truth is that the return is less about watching for a moment in history and more about recognizing the flow of consciousness that is already reshaping us from within. Each act of compassion, each moment of forgiveness, each decision to love when it would be easier to hate becomes part of that process. This is not a waiting game. It is a living journey. The return does not belong to the future alone. It is woven into the present, into the impact of the choices we make daily. And so the most piercing question Cayce left us with was not, "When will he come?" but "Are we ready for him now?" This reframing moves everything out of the realm of speculation and into the realm of responsibility. It is no longer about deciphering codes or anxiously anticipating dates. It is about readiness, readiness of the heart, readiness of the spirit, readiness to embody the consciousness of Christ here and now. This shift takes prophecy out of the clouds and brings it down to earth, into the reality of our own decisions. It asks us to consider whether we are preparing ourselves to be vessels of that presence, whether we are clearing the space in our lives for love to dwell without condition. Seen from this perspective, the journey is far more intimate than people expect. It is not about a stage set for the world to watch, but about what unfolds behind the scenes in each human being. The great event is not in the skies above, but in the transformation within. And that truth is both liberating and unsettling. It liberates us from the paralysis of waiting, but it unsettles us, because it leaves no excuse. The timeline of return does not depend on divine clocks. It depends on whether we are willing to awaken. In that sense, the prophecy becomes deeply personal. It is not only about humanity as a whole, but about the individual heart that decides whether to open or to remain closed. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because when Cayce spoke of readiness, he was pointing to something much more profound than preparation for an event. He was pointing to a mindset of vigilance, a way of living where every moment becomes sacred ground, where every choice either aligns with Christ consciousness or distances us from it. To be ready is not to watch the skies, but to transform the heart, and in that transformation lies the true unfolding of prophecy, not as a distant future, but as a living revelation. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "I choose to be ready now." Cayce described Christ's return not as an otherworldly intrusion into human history, but as something woven into the very laws of the universe. For him, it was never about magic or spectacle. It was about spiritual principles as real and consistent as gravity. Just as physical laws govern the movement of planets, he believed universal spiritual laws governed the unfolding of human destiny. In this sense, the return of Christ was not a disruption of reality, but its deepest expression, the natural flowering of consciousness when humanity aligns with love, compassion, and unity. This vision reframes the prophecy as less of a miraculous interruption and more of an inevitable consequence of spiritual growth. It suggests that transformation is built into the fabric of existence itself. Yet, in presenting such an idea, Cayce found himself at odds with both ends of the spectrum. On one side stood religious dogma, which insisted that the return must conform to literal interpretations of Scripture, filled with imagery of judgment and spectacle. On the other stood scientific materialism, which dismissed any notion of spiritual law as superstition. Cayce's message clashed with both, because it refused to fit into the neat boxes of doctrine or skepticism. He described a reality that blurred boundaries, where faith and reason were not enemies, but allies pointing toward the same hidden truth. It was a vision that asked both believers and skeptics to set aside certainty and embrace the unknown, to step into a mindset that could hold paradox without fear. And here is where things become even more fascinating. While Cayce spoke these words in trance more than a century ago, modern research is beginning to circle back to the very ideas he proposed. Studies of consciousness, energy fields, and the interconnectedness of human experience are starting to suggest that the mind and spirit cannot be dismissed as illusions. Neuroscience, quantum physics, and psychology are each, in their own way, uncovering cracks in the old narrative of a purely material universe. Behind the scenes of scientific progress, discoveries point to something greater, a field of energy and awareness that binds us together, echoing Cayce's claim that Christ consciousness is not an abstraction, but a reality waiting to be measured not only by faith, but by experience. The impact of this convergence is extraordinary. For centuries, humanity has been split between two seemingly opposing paths, the path of faith and the path of science. Cayce's vision dissolves that divide, showing that the return of Christ is not confined to the church pews or the laboratory. It lives in the space where the human spirit and universal law meet. The revelation is that these two forces, once considered enemies, may in fact be partners in the same journey. And doesn't that possibility change everything? It takes the prophecy from the realm of blind belief and roots it in something far more tangible, a living reality we can experience, explore, and even begin to understand through the lens of transformation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because Cayce's message invites us to see that the real conflict has never been between God and science, but between limited ways of seeing. Both dogma and materialism cling to control, one through fear, the other through dismissal. But the return of Christ, as Cayce described it, transcends those boundaries. It is not about defending one system over another, but about opening ourselves to the revelation that truth can live in both. And that requires courage. The courage to question, to let go of rigid categories, and to step into a journey where spirit and knowledge walk together. If this perspective resonates with you, write in the comments, "Faith and reason unite within me." Cayce's vision reached a point where faith and reason were no longer separate paths, but two sides of the same revelation. He suggested that understanding Christ's return required both the sensitivity of faith and the curiosity of science. Faith without reason could become blind dogma, and reason without faith could turn into sterile skepticism. But when these two forces unite, something transformative emerges, a way of seeing the world where spiritual truths are not confined to belief alone, but become experiences that can be lived, felt, and even measured in their impact. This merging is not about reducing the sacred to formulas or making faith dependent on proof. It is about recognizing that the universe is layered with both mystery and law, and that Christ consciousness flows through both. This is why Cayce insisted that the return could never be defined by proof or trapped in doctrine. Neither laboratories nor cathedrals could hold it. To demand evidence in a test tube or to bind it in a rigid creed was to miss the very essence of the revelation. The return, he said, was not about theories or traditions. It was about lived experience. It was about transformation that could be felt in the heart, expressed in actions, and reflected in the collective awakening of humanity. This hidden truth invites us to step out of the safety of explanation and into the vulnerability of experience. It asks us not to debate Christ's return, but to live it in every choice that carries the energy of compassion, forgiveness, and love. And this is where Cayce introduced one of his most powerful insights, the idea of the cosmic Christ. For him, Christ was not confined to the role of a single historical figure or bound by the borders of one religion. Christ was, and is, a universal energy permeating all creation. This energy, he said, is the consciousness of unity, the invisible thread connecting every star, every soul, every particle of existence. It is not owned by any faith, any institution, or any culture. It belongs to the universe itself, and to each of us as expressions of that universe. The return of Christ, then, is not about waiting for a single body to appear, but about awakening to this cosmic presence that has always been here, waiting for us to recognize it. Think for a moment about the impact of that perspective. If Christ is not limited to history or religion, then his presence can be found in every culture, in every act of truth, in every whisper of love across time and space. It breaks down barriers of division, reminding us that no one has a monopoly on the divine. The cosmic Christ dissolves the walls of exclusivity and invites humanity to see itself as part of a greater whole. It is a revelation that removes distance and places the sacred in everything, within us, around us, and far beyond us. This is not an abstract idea. It is a shift in mindset, a transformation in how we live our journey. It reframes not just faith, but existence itself. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the concept of the cosmic Christ is more than a theological idea. It is an invitation to see the world with new eyes. It means that every moment of connection, every act of compassion, every glimpse of beauty is not random but infused with sacred meaning. It challenges us to expand our awareness beyond ritual and beyond proof, and to live as though the divine flows through every corner of creation. And in doing so, we begin to see that the return of Christ is not about his coming to us, but about our awakening to him already here. If this vision resonates with you, write in the comments, "The cosmic Christ is here." Cayce's vision of the cosmic Christ carried a message that broke through centuries of division. He described a Christ not bound by religion, not limited to the walls of a temple or the language of a single creed. Instead, Christ belonged to all humanity, to the stars above and the souls within. This idea was not about erasing tradition but about transcending boundaries, showing that the sacred cannot be confined to one culture, one time, or one set of beliefs. It was a revelation of universality, an invitation for every human being, no matter their background, to recognize themselves as part of this greater consciousness, and this changes the entire perspective of spirituality. It no longer matters where you were born or what rituals you inherited. What matters is the openness of your heart to recognize that divine presence that flows through all of creation. For Cayce, this universality was not an abstract philosophy, but a living force. The cosmic Christ revealed itself through transformation, and that transformation always began with love. Love was not a sentiment for him. It was the most powerful energy in the universe, the key that turned darkness into light, fear into trust, and hate into compassion. To awaken to the cosmic Christ was to awaken to love in its purest form, to live as if every action, every word, every decision carried the potential to heal and to restore. And when seen through that lens, life itself becomes sacred theater. Every challenge becomes an invitation, every act of kindness, revelation. This was the hidden truth Cayce wanted us to see. The return is not a distant event, but an ongoing transformation fueled by love itself. Yet, such a message carried a dangerous impact for the institutions that had long claimed ownership of spiritual authority. If Christ truly lived in all and for all, if his presence was not confined to ritual or controlled by hierarchy, then the structures of power that thrived on exclusivity began to lose their grip. Cayce's words shifted power back to the individual, telling people that they didn't need an intermediary to touch the divine, because the divine already lived within them. For those invested in control, this was unsettling, even threatening, and history shows us how ideas like his are often silenced, dismissed, or branded as heresy, not necessarily because they lack truth, but because they remove control from the few and restore it to the many. This resistance is not surprising when you see how revolutionary his vision was. Imagine a world where people no longer fear that they are separate from God, where the sacred is not distant but intimately close, pulsing through every heart. Such a mindset would dismantle the structures that rely on fear to maintain obedience. It would liberate faith from external control and root it in direct experience. That kind of awakening cannot be contained by doctrines or manipulated through guilt. It sets people free. And that freedom is precisely what Cayce believed Christ's return was meant to bring. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the tension between liberation and control is not only a story of religious institutions, it is a story that echoes in our own lives. How often do we resist transformation because it threatens the systems we have built for ourselves? How often do we cling to familiar patterns, even when they limit us, because the unknown feels too disruptive? Cayce's vision reminds us that the same courage required to challenge institutions is also required within us. To accept that Christ is already here, already alive within, is to embrace a journey of responsibility and freedom that can feel overwhelming, but it is also the path to true awakening. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, "Love is my path to freedom." Cayce often emphasized that the greatest preparation for the return of Christ was not to be found in prophecy charts or theological debates, but in the building of the inner temple. He spoke of prayer, not as a mechanical recitation of words, but as a living dialogue with the divine, an act that reshaped the heart and mind. In his view, prayer was a tuning fork that aligned human consciousness with the frequency of Christ consciousness, a way of opening space for the sacred to dwell more fully within. Alongside prayer, he spoke of kindness, forgiveness, and discipline, not as rules imposed from outside, but as tools that helped us clear the inner clutter, sweep away the dust of ego, and make room for the light that was always waiting. This preparation was less about ritual and more about mindset, every choice to forgive rather than resent, every decision to act with compassion instead of indifference, every small discipline that strengthens integrity becomes a stone laid in the inner sanctuary where Christ longs to return. In describing this process, Cayce made something profoundly clear. The temple is not an external building, nor is it a place we must travel to find. It is within us. And preparing that temple is not about grand gestures, but about daily practices that slowly reshape the soul. Behind the scenes of ordinary life, it is in the moments of patience with others, in the courage to face our own flaws, and in the willingness to live truthfully that the preparation takes form. These decisions may seem small, but in reality, they hold immense impact. They create the conditions for Christ's return, not in the clouds above, but in the space of the human heart. Cayce concluded with a truth that turns the entire narrative upside down. The return of Christ does not depend on a date or a cosmic event. It depends on each person's willingness to open their heart to love. The return happens every time a heart awakens, every time someone chooses love over fear, every time compassion becomes stronger than judgment. In this light, the prophecy is no longer something we wait for. It is something we live. The hidden truth is that Christ's return is not a singular event in history, but a continuous unfolding, written in the lives of those who dare to embody it. And this is where Cayce's message strikes with both beauty and responsibility. If the return happens in every heart, then the stage of prophecy is not distant or abstract. It is intimate and personal. It means that how we live, how we love, and how we choose to face each moment is the very stage on which the return takes place. That realization can feel overwhelming, but it also carries an extraordinary liberation. We no longer need to fear the future or anxiously search the skies for signs. The true sign is within us, in the way we prepare the temple of the heart and allow love to dwell there fully. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because if the return truly happens in the heart, then the entire meaning of prophecy changes. It is no longer about waiting for external proof, but about recognizing the transformation that is already unfolding in silence. It becomes a journey not of waiting but of awakening, not of fear but of participation. The impact of this truth is that it gives us back the power to live the prophecy instead of simply watching for it. It calls us to make decisions that align with the Christ already within us, to recognize that the hidden calendar is written not in the stars, but in the choices of love we make daily. If this vision speaks to you, write in the comments, "My heart is ready." If you've made it this far, it means this message has touched something in you, and that already makes this journey worthwhile. If the reflections we shared here brought you clarity or inspiration, I'd love for you to subscribe so you don't miss the next step in this ongoing exploration. And let me know in the comments that you reached the end by writing, "I'm with you until the end." It's always powerful to see who stayed present until the final words. If this conversation resonated with your heart, a simple like on the video is a beautiful way to let me know we're walking this path together. And if you feel ready to keep unfolding these hidden truths, there's a video right here that complements everything we've just uncovered. Click and continue with me over there. We'll keep this journey alive together.